right, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Boom, and welcome to the Big Honker Podcast. I'm Jeff Stanfield.
I'm Andy Shaver, and with us today we have Durham detective, retired detective, Mr. Charles Sole. I got to tell you, Charles, Durham, I did not know that it was just this crime haven that you got up there in Durham. What is going on? You got some high-profile cases there.
Yeah, I mean, Durham is in the state, not the largest city, but it does have, some major universities and a lot of the Research Triangle, which is, a big draw, nation and worldwide. So it does get some attention, and it has, the crime issues that, a lot of the big cities have as well.
Y'all also, not talking about the ones we're going to discuss today, but the Duke Lacrosse deal, were you a part of that?
No, I wasn't. I was actually in a different assignment at the time. I experienced it through, different things that we had to do. You had all kinds of marches and rallies and things of that nature. But that's another one that's on the world stage, if you will, as far as in the city.
Andy was a young kid on that. A girl that she was a stripper, wasn't she?
Yeah, I think that she was a stripper. There was allegations of a call girl, and basically, she was at one of the Duke Lacrosse. I guess it was I don't know if it was actually a fraternity house, but a house that they had, and it was a big allegation of a rape, and it got really sideways. It became really political because there was a DA running for election, and he kind of used it as a pulpit as well. It was put Durham on the map for sure when it probably not in the best light.
It was huge news, and the Reverend Jesse and the big Reverend Al got involved and turned it into a big race deal too, didn't they?
Yeah, and you had some high profile attorneys. I think the attorneys that were involved in a guy with the Panthers, organization that had some charges. I mean, you had a lot of focus on Durham, that brought in all kinds of elements.
It was basically rich white kids against a stripper that said she got raped, and they found out the boys were telling the truth, right?
It was ultimately it was dismissed. The actual prosecutor who was running at the time was disbarred.
No kidding,
I mean, it was a train wreck on the side of, from a prosecution standpoint.
He actually resigned. He had to after this scandal.
I think he was disbarred. I don't
disbarred.
think there was an option to resign.
This was big news. This was on the world news every night.
This was a train wreck.
Yeah, it's funny because if you listen to talking about some conservative voices, Sean Hannity, he brings it up occasionally.
They do.
That he made the call on that case, early on. So yeah, it was there.
Boy, talk about sticking your neck out though for Sean Hannity to come out and say, "Hey."
Well, this was the first of the with Reverend Al. I think Cabrini. There's something happened with a Jewish shop owner in Harlem. He did something, but Reverend Al was going to run for president under one other party. I don't remember which. It's not the Libertarian, but I can't remember. But anyways, that was part of it, and this was the first big. And he was right in the middle of all that stuff.
Right.
And it was a bad look for Duke University and everything, and the kids were innocent.
And they said that all along. Jeez.
And they got paid.
The Duke kids did?
Paid, yes, extremely well. Yes, I mean if you Google Duke Lacrosse, I mean these kids were, and I think part of it was most of it was from the university because they cut these kids loose, and and it was Duke's lacrosse is significant.
Right.
I mean, they're a powerhouse.
Just like their basketball team. I mean, it was the same type deal. It's just not as big a national stage for it, but it was big. It was big news. I mean, and they had to hit the riots, all the stuff that we see today on every time somebody happens. And as usual, it turns out kind of like the anti-cop marches. We find out the cops always right 99% of the time.
Is that starting to calm down a little bit now that or are you still seeing that out on the streets, the anti-cop movement?
I mean, I think certain media feeds that to us, and we see it. You know, as far as experiencing it, yeah, I mean, it was frustration, particularly when you have a career for, you know, three decades, you know, in a profession. And I can tell you, you know, without a question, you know, things that are claimed and, you know, that are like alleged to be everyday occurrences. It just didn't. And I didn't just have a career that stuck me in Durham. I mean, I went to several places in the state, several places in the country, and just never even saw it amongst other law enforcement officers. I mean, are there some bad apples? Sure. I mean, you can't argue that, because, you know, just look. I mean, you know, people that have done it, but it's not the majority, even close.
Yeah, and it's just it's a job that I don't think commands enough respect in today's time, and it's a job that if every cop decided tomorrow that they weren't going to go to work, it would be anarchy in about 2 hours. And, you know, people always bash the cop until they need a cop, is what it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. I don't like a police officer or trooper to pull behind me, and I'm retired from the job. So I mean, it's just kind of a natural feeling. But, you know, for the most part, you know, the women and men that are in law enforcement, they're there to do good. I mean, the career it's not a moneymaker. In today's world, you know, it's something that is almost kind of like, you know, a negative thing, you know, as far as to have that association. You know, it's just, you know, I think that and it's frustrating for me that law enforcement is vilified by, you know, politicians and other folks trying to leverage that. That's the issue I have. Again, are there things that could be better? Training, you know, things like, of course. I mean, that's obvious, but it's not the majority. It isn't.
It's just we're in an upside down society right now, and things will kind of, hopefully they don't get bad enough to where it's inevitable, but things will sort themselves out. I have a suspicion. So what made you want to become a cop?
It was kind of one of these deals that I've always had an interest in it. You know, when I was young, I grew up in a military Catholic. I went to a military Catholic high school, so I kind of had my taste of regimentation, and I was kind of torn between, you know, service the country or, you know, going into to this law enforcement career. So I grew up in Richmond, moved down south to North Carolina, just a couple hours south, and then kind of pursued that law enforcement career, and just kind of, you know, my draw to it and what is always kind of the passion is that there's a lot of underdogs out there that, you know, aren't going to be able to stand up for themselves or don't want to stand up for themselves, and they need something. You know, and you know, I kind of looked at that law enforcement opportunity is that.
And then, so you told me, we talked before, we talked on Friday, I guess. You told me that you were a narcotics detective before you were a homicide detective?
Yes. So I worked kind of the typical route. I was a patrolman, and I went from a patrolman to what was, you know, law enforcement goes through its iterations of, you hear like these terms like community policing, you know, all these different terms. So back then in the 90s, community policing became a really big initiative for law enforcement. So I went to what was basically like a uniformed drug type of unit, like a street crimes unit, to where we supported the narcotics division. And then kind of from there, I fed into a position as a narcotics investigator, and spent the majority of my time there doing street crimes. And I went to major crimes. Also did a stint as a narcotics interdiction guy, and got to handle a drug detector dog, which was awesome. I mean, being a dog handler. And then I left that unit and took on a patrol canine position, just because it was kind of a natural segue, already having the detector dog training. And then from the patrol canine, I went to what they call criminal investigations and homicide.
I would think that being a narc or whatever they call them now would be the coolest job to go undercover and bust dope heads, dealers.
I don't know.
Oh, you get to fuck with people all day long. That would be awesome.
It has its fun, but it also has its crazy schedules. I mean, you know, you come into work at one time and you work into a case, and it takes you, 3 days later, you're waking up, in another jurisdiction, trying to move this case forward. So it yeah, I mean, is a job, it's definitely fulfilling, but the narcotics investigators, the one thing that was obvious is there was never, you could never really have a set schedule. You would come into the office, you would know when you were coming in, but often, it really depended on where the cases led you.
A desperate dope dealer will do anything to make a sale, though. And
Yep.
we've hunted a lot of guys, and I've got friends of mine that are drug cops, is what I call them, and I've got papers. They want you to smoke the dope with them or do it. I can't. I'm on papers and shit. Them guys fall for that shit all the time.
Yeah, some of the undercover operations, when you're monitoring them, and listening to the undercover and the perpetrator, they can be they can be funny. The stuff that takes place. I mean, there is some the technology now, I can only imagine, but back then, I mean, we had a lot of video and audio, and some of the times it was, folks would be like, I can't believe that actually goes on.
We had a guy out here this last year, and he was an undercover narcotics officer, and he's like, yeah, you just tell them that you're on papers, because first time you buy from somebody, they want you to smoke the dope in front of them, and you just tell them that you're on papers, and that you like, your girlfriend likes it, and she likes to take it before y'all have sex, and 9 times out of 10 they let you have it. If I'm a career drug dealer, and somebody tells me that they're on papers, like, that's a cop right there. It's got to be.
If you're a career drug dealer and you're still on the street selling nickel bags or whatever it is, life's not been very good for you as a salesperson.
I was going to say. But
you haven't moved up.
Nowadays, it's all changed with like the internet. When we were doing street crimes, we would always deal with like actual prostitutes on the corners and things like that. Now everything is it's all online, most of it, and I'm sure a lot of the narcotic stuff is moved that way. I mean, that's it seems to be, almost a generation that's kind of conditioned to the phone and the tablet and the computer.
So, go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
But let's dig into.
Well, hold on. What made you want to transition from being a narcotics detective to criminal investigations and homicide?
Well, it was really presented me from a supervisor that I had worked to before. They had the vacancies up there, and it was kind of something I always had interested in, because they're completely different. Like a narcotics investigation it runs in a completely different direction than criminal investigations, just because most of the criminal investigations are after the fact. Guys catch a report, or in narcotics, I mean, you work with sources, and you like you said, you have undercover operations. I mean, things that are happening in real time. Just wanting to have another step in my career. Criminal investigations seemed to be something at that time that was very interesting.
When I was a kid, I thought that I wanted to be a homicide detective, and after first preparing for this interview, I have quickly realized that I don't have the stomach for it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't turn that switch off and go home and see my wife and see my kids. I don't think that that's a switch that I could flip on and off.
Yeah, I mean, I even, the folks that are still in that unit that I know well, there's a lot of younger guys in there now, but I'm always a big preacher of like, hey, you're getting away. You need to, sometimes, I mean, you got to put it down, because, like anything, it can consume you. And one of the things that I found out personally and nationwide, homicide investigations just are so different from your typical, when your typical investigation or crime that you're looking into, because you have the victim's family there,
right?
And they want closure. They want something, and one of the things that folks don't look at, and you hear about a lot now with a lot of suicides, they're the same. Like for a lot of families, I mean, it's just such an open wound that and a lot of them, I had one that came in as a suicide and ended up going to trial, and it was a homicide. Supposedly the wife had shot herself in the chest, it started as a suicide, but those are just as bad because of it's that closure element.
Right.
And I don't believe as a homicide investigator we really bring closure. I think that's sought somewhere else. Personally,
I think you're right on that. What I notice is that, especially I like to watch the first 48 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it amazes me the way the people in the background, the family, and a lot of times the family, you can tell it, because most murders are committed by a family member. Isn't that correct?
I mean, it depends. I mean, the domestic homicides, but a lot of when wife goes for a jog and is missing for a week and then is later found. Yeah, I mean, you're looking in a certain direction at the beginning. I mean, so yeah, there's a lot of that goes on.
But the way the family members react is just amazing. We had a guy die here one time, and I was the first person on the scene, and I got there, and it was some sisters, and one sister was frantic. She was crying, bawling. Another sister was worried about other things, like money-wise and stuff like that, and I thought, that's pretty damn peculiar. It's just amazing the way people freaking act when someone dies.
Well, so here's what I used to always tell families. And this happened often. The most important thing that an investigator can know is their victim. The victimology, like what would make them susceptible to this act. So in having trying to figure that out. I mean, you need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm talking the ugly, or it comes out. There's been several cases where we were working a case. I had one time. It ultimately been a gang execution in the parking lot of a restaurant, and as part of the crime scene, we had a guy that was shot in a business next door. He got shot through his car window, and what turned out to be is, he wasn't part of the, honestly, when I got the call in, they said, hey, we've got, a person deceased and we've got another person who's shot at the hospital. So I'm immediately thinking, okay, well, there's a lot here, there's a connection. But what had happened with that guy is he was hooking up some people at the restaurant for cell phones, and he happened to circle the parking lot along while these guys were out here doing this, sitting up on this guy to take him out, and they saw him as a potential threat, so they shot him as well. So it was just, he kept this story for a month or two, and then finally he admitted to it, because then the guy's got family, a wife, a job, so he's trying to cover it up, and you're like, I really don't care. I just need to know. I'm thinking he had some involvement. Mm-hmm. So you get that often. And that's where, like what we're talking about is that, often family members or friends are reluctant to tell, the bad stuff, which could be helpful in solving the case. So it's just one of those things that eventually comes out, but it certainly puts up a hurdle or a roadblock.
Well, and I mean, you're dealing with people on the worst day of their life for a lot of these people.
Sure.
I mean, and, like Jeff said, it always amazes him how people react, to a death in the family or something like that. But how much as an investigator can you look at how the family is reacting? So like in the Abaroa case, okay, the day that they bury his wife, you flies.
You need to backtrack on this. People, they don't know what Abaroa case is.
Okay, we'll just get into it. So one of the cases that you worked that gained national notoriety was the Raven Abaroa case. Killed his wife, he said she was going to bed. He went to play soccer with his friends, came home, she was shot, is what he tells the police. And anyway, long story short, day they bury her, he cashes in her life insurance policy. So is that enough to look at Raven as a potential suspect as like, hey, this doesn't seem right? Or can you just say, hey, everybody reacts differently in the case of a tragedy?
Well, here's the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is always remember the totality of the circumstances. Like one individual act may be completely harmless and could turn out to be that, or it could be the most pivotal part of the case. Because in Abaroa, let's take that one for example. One of the things that when I got Abaroa, I got it as a cold case. I think it was 4 or 5 years old when I caught it. And, what I did is I got the files and, the boss said, hey, take this thing, spend, some time on going over it. And so I went into it, with a clear mind and just started, digesting everything that was available for the case, and one of the things that stuck out to me was the initial officer's response, and it was brought up in the court. And the reason that this ties in with what you're talking about is that, here is a guy whose wife had just been murdered, and he says that she was shot, but she was actually stabbed, which is important too, because stabbing is an intimate thing. It's not something that, particularly in domestic homicides. But anyway,
can I stop you right there? Do you
to
think he said that she was shot to kind of throw the investigators off? Do you think that's why he said that to the police?
I just think Raven's case was the classic example of staging. It was the most staged crime scene ever. Textbook. You could teach seminars on this case on staging. And what I mean is, and he went days before. Again, you got to remember, and you and I talked about the Peterson case. Yeah. Some of these guys, these domestic homicides, I mean, there's a plot. They plan. It's not, in the heat of the moment. Now, there are occasions in the heat of the moment, but like in this case, no, there was planning, staging, taking cars away, doing different things to get the crime scene to where it would be. And I think what he did, and if you ever, the most convincing thing that you can ever do, and we did it in court, is listen to the 911 recording. Mm-hmm. Not one time, and I want to say it goes on for several minutes, does he ever ask for help for his wife. I'm going to tell you, and that was a huge thing. There's actually indicators or a profile, if you will, on 911 calls. It's, when your 911 caller is the killer. He hit 70% of them. Because think about it. Think about this. And going back to what you're talking about, a family member, if your wife or your loved one, you come home and you find them in that condition, you're not going to be talking. I really encourage you and your audience to listen to it, because that to me, it was the tipping point. And what he does is, through the entire time, he asked for his bishop. He asked for the other things for himself, and never once does he ask for help. And he also accepts her death, which is not part of what happens. He describes her condition. He describes the house. He describes all these details, which, I've listened to hundreds of 911 calls, and that just doesn't occur. Normally they're mad. They're like, cussing. They're wanting the police here. They're wanting help for their victim, and they don't stay on the phone like he did. So, but let's go back to where we were talking about. So these little indicators or totality of circumstances, what really drew my eye to how this thing was playing out is the initial officer that responds, uniform patrol, in uniform, as a female officer. And during his interaction with that officer, who took detailed notes and, fired off a written report immediately after it, she described, he's like almost flirting with her. Like, come on. Really, it's so these are the kind of things that, when you're looking at the totality of circumstances, sure, that's not usual behavior at all from a suspect.
So is there, how does this work in your precinct or your office? When do y'all reopen cases as you said you got the Abaroa case as a cold case? Is that something, did the 2020 interview with the sisters, did that cause a little bit of re-interest into the case, or do you look for a break? How does this reopen in front of you?
So I think there's several things that do it. One of the big things nowadays is with technologies and forensics. Genealogy is huge. There's a lot of files that are open or are closed because of, DNA. I think when we were talking the other day, we talked about that. So that is a huge advance in science is usually what they kind of attribute it to. But yeah, I mean, there's pressure put on by families, and the hard part about cold cases, you see, all these television shows and cop dramas and all this, and guys that get involved in investigating homicides, and immediately they want to go and put down put down or solve a cold case, and it just the danger there is in working these cold cases is you have to be careful because. Hence it being cold, usually there's a significant time that's expired. But when you go back to the families who have already, that wound is already healed, and you show up and say, hey, I'm looking at this murder, and the next thing you know, you pick that scab open and all those, So for me, my struggle with it was also, and a lot of the folks on the unit is that the emotional part. Last thing I want to do is go, upset somebody's world. Right. Digging up a 10-year-old or 20-year-old homicide just because it's an interesting file to look at.
Right. So there has to be something
you gotta
there.
have something.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And Abaroa, the sisters, they were relentless, which I totally expect them. And so let's take, I think you probably did a little bit of digging on the Abaroa case. Yeah. And if folks didn't, if you look at the sisters and their passion, with getting this case solved. But who didn't show that passion was Raven. That to me was the obvious. Like if your wife is murdered and your child's in the next room and you're anything worth anything, you're going to be doing the same thing the sisters were doing times 10. Right. This guy was back in Utah before, he didn't even pack up his own stuff. He hauled out of North Carolina to Utah and had family members pack up his stuff, and he was out of here. And
that's
not normal.
Is the first 48? Is that bullshit? Like, you've got more than 48 hours?
No, the chances are better in first 48.
But I'm asking you, is that true?
Well, yeah. So you've got to the leads do start evaporating. But then sometimes when time passes. Some witnesses are reluctant, forensics, forensics doesn't, it's not like, these shows where, you're going to get, a DNA hit back, in a month. I mean, it's usually months. So, but it is, I mean, I think I've only seen the first 48. I think they did an episode in Raleigh, but I thought they were, partnered with actual cops. So, you're going through that process of, tracking down the leads and all that. So, but you do have that short period of time. Typically what happened in our offices is you would catch the case, as many folks that were available or on-call people that were available, they would physically be working it. And then when it was assigned to whomever, then you kind of took that on your own and you grabbed resources as you needed them to follow up.
That was I read the part of the Abaroa case, and what killed me about the whole thing was after I read the whole thing on it is the guy was out of jail already.
Yeah.
That just blows my freaking mind.
The Alfred plea.
I don't.
Yeah, that was crazy. That's
got to be frustrating for y'all.
Yeah, it is. And we have our role, and I will tell you, the prosecutor in this case, she was amazing. She did an amazing job of getting it in front of a jury. And we hung 11-1 in a jury trial. So it obviously convinced all but one person that he was guilty in the case.
Are you nervous when you have to testify at a trial?
No. I mean, having done it so often, no. There's. You want to make sure that you present everything that you can, but you got to remember too. And folks that let's take for example this these impeachment things. Yeah. Like my biggest problem with that is that I vehemently respect due process on both sides of the coin. You have to have a process that is open and fair for both parties in our country, or it's no good. So. As a witness, you want to make sure that you present the information, but you also have to remember the attorneys, there's certain things that they're not going to let in, and there's certain things that they're going to, fight to keep out. And fight, even in a hearing, outside of a jury. Because,
what initially started this conversation is I mentioned that I watched The Staircase, and your son Kyle reached out to me and mentioned you had some involvement in that case, and then we got to dig and got to talking to you, and you had the lead on all these other cases. But the defense in The Staircase in the Michael Peterson trial, I mean, he kind of tied these people up in knots, and I didn't know, like, if whenever you had to take the stand, if that was something that you were worried about.
No, because it's always a thing. If you're delivering the information, I think folks, unlike myself and other people that are in the court setting, it's extremely intimidating and extremely unnerving for a lot of people. And sometimes that can, folks can allege that that's a credibility issue. But I think, like with witnesses, I would never really use that as like a huge barometer as far as credibility, just because folks are nervous. Right. Think about it. And I've seen hundreds of witnesses get up on that stand versus us. We go through training of testifying in court. As a road cop, you're dealing with, traffic stops, and, things like that. So you have a little bit more familiarity, and it's not quite as intimidating being, in the courtroom.
So we can kind of switch gears. We can go the Deaver character in The Staircase. It seemed like, and I know how Hollywood is, but it seemed like he was trying to recreate to show that it was, in fact, Michael Peterson, because I believe there was a blood stain on the inside of his thigh or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. But it seemed like he was going from here, from the end, and working backwards, rather than looking at it maybe objectively. He was trying to pin it to where it could only be Michael Peterson getting a blood stain like that. Is that normal, or is that Hollywood? Because you said you watched a documentary also.
Yeah, I did. I don't recall the documentary part about it, but the part that I do recall about that case is one of the things that is a homicide investigator, I always tell people you're the conductor of the band. You can't play every instrument. You may not even know how to play the instruments, but you got to make that music work. So as a lead investigator, you have to get all these people together, and Deaver being an expert witness on bloodstain case, he was brought in and conducted his analysis and ultimately, and I don't recall the actual details of how his testimony was eventually impeached, and it led to there being a motion for relief for Michael Peterson to actually, who's out. Mm-hmm. But from what I recall, there was what is called micro spray. The object impacts the surface with blood or whatever, and then it's it's like it just flies all over the place. And the micro spray is typically something that people don't see. Like when you're cleaning up when these folks are cleaning up a crime scene or covering it up, they're going to overlook things like that. And that's usually what, as an investigator, that's the kind of things that you're looking for. Like, there's always something there. There's never the perfect crime, right? If you will. So yeah, he was pivotal in bringing that evidence forward and presenting it at trial. What? And clearly that would be damning evidence if he had blood on him. See, and unlike in Abaroa, I am certain, and it was presented at court, that he intentionally got Janet's blood on him and interacted with her body and got blood over him, because then okay, I've got her blood on me. Why? Of course I do. I hugged her. I put my hand over the wound. Right. Those are the kind of things. So
those would be normal actions, though, I would think. If you really come in and found your wife been murdered or shot or whatever, hurting, would be to go grab her and try to help her.
No doubt. But let me ask you this. I'm assuming you said you responded. Or are you a firefighter or a EMS guy?
He's a judge.
Yeah, I'm a small town judge. Let's don't get this confused with a real judge, okay?
So anyone out there that's done CPR or is doing CPR or takes a CPR class, imagine, if you will, the crime scene. You come home, you find your wife on the floor in the office with a hole in her chest, blood on the floor around her, obviously all the gory stuff, and you go to put your hand over it, and then your statement is no, I was doing CPR. I was making a life saving. This is what you tell other people. But think about this. If anyone, I don't know if you guys have taken CPR, but it's a pretty violent process.
Yes.
And you're moving all over the place. I don't know if you guys hunt, so you've had animal blood on your hand, which is probably have some consistency of human blood. It's kind of oily and slick.
Yeah.
Well, this handprint on Janet's chest actually has his ridge details. So think about putting your hand down just soft enough to leave your fingerprints.
Right.
And if you're doing CPR, you're not going to leave your fingerprints.
It's all going to be smushed together.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, I argued it was the staging.
So he thought about this. He had weeks that he was brewing about this. And
no doubt.
What did we ever get to the bottom? I mean, I know that he put in the Alford plea, which Michael Peterson also did. And what that is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's criminally you're admitting to it, but like you say you're not going to plead guilty. It's a weird plea, the Alford plea.
You're not admitting to the crime, but you're pleading. You're basically saying there's, I can't exonerate myself, but I'm going to take a plea. And I don't know if all states recognize it. I know North Carolina does, and it's always like a source of debate. But
yeah, because if you'll say it in court that you're guilty, but
you're guilty.
I mean, it should be open and shut. Because basically what I took from it is I can't fight this case. They've got evidence against me, and Michael Peterson was adamant. He said, I'm not going to say that I killed her, but I know I can't win in court, so let me just take this lesser plea. Let me take this deal, basically.
Yep. It's frustrating, particularly for the family. I mean, I can't be selfish as an investigator, but I mean, think about the family. I mean, think about, this trek for closure, and that's what you get, I mean, out in less than 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's crazy.
And what people always overlook in Abaroa is that she was pregnant as well.
Double murder.
Yeah, I heard that because I watched it with my wife because we like these, ever since The Staircase, we've been looking for the next big, murder mystery to watch together. And so there wasn't 2020 had done a documentary on Raven, so we watched that together. And that was a detail that we missed until the very end because I said it several times. I said she was pregnant. She said, no, she had a 6-month-old son. I said, no, lady, she was pregnant.
Earlier, Andy said something that I thought was kind of funny, though. You said he cashed the life insurance check.
Yeah.
Well, there's not a. When do you wait? You wait 6 months to cash it?
No, but that's what I'm saying. Like, is that damning is that evidence to your point, or is that just like, shit, everybody's different?
I need to know this answer in case I stage one of these things because I've learned if I call 911, I need to ask for help for my dead wife, and then I need to figure out how long I'm supposed to wait for a cash this insurance check.
I don't want to be prepping the next serial killer. No. So in Abaroa, just for correction, he never got the life insurance. Matter of fact, that was a big thing for the family, and to me, it was a big indicator of motive because you got to remember. And for those that aren't, obviously, know all the details, but in Abaroa, they couldn't put, 2 pennies together. Right. They were on church welfare. They were Mormons, and their church was actually providing them food on a weekly basis. They were behind on rent. They were upside down and everything, but that life insurance policy got paid. And
weird.
So he never got it. The life insurance company held it. And held it, and I think eventually they awarded it to Janet's family, if I'm not mistaken, because of the court outcome. But I'm not 100% certain.
On a murder case, though, I'm assuming that when someone passes away, like my dad passed away, they don't give you a life insurance check for 2-3 months. Seems like time they get the death certificate and stuff. But on a murder death certificate, they would hold that up if they thought anybody getting the money was involved, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah, they did, and that was a huge part of the case. I mean, we actually did multiple interviews. I actually went and interviewed the agent that drew the policy, and relied on his experience. I mean, they were a young couple, but again, they were making a payment. I think it was 100 and some bucks a month on life insurance. Like there are people that that have decent careers that aren't able to afford life insurance when you're in that financial situation.
Now he had lost his job for embezzlement for stealing, didn't he?
So he did lose one job for embezzlement, where Janet and he both were working. It was at a soccer sports apparel company that he was like a night shift manager in. So that he was basically, this is when eBay was the thing, So what he was basically doing is creating fake orders. A lot of them were going to Utah. I believe some of them were actually going to his mother. I didn't get involved in the fraud case. I just looked at it as part of our case. But basically, they were embezzling, taking the apparel and the stuff, and then they were selling it on eBay. The case when the case came to me, one of the lead investigators on the case was a phenomenal fraud guy, and he did a big fraud, outlay of it, which was, I believe, a huge motive in the crime. Was that life insurance policy. Plus, I think Raven just felt like it was going to be greener on the other side of the fence. I think that he was to that point, and also he was riddled with all kinds of affairs, and things of that nature.
So what is it with these killers and the fangirls that they get once they're locked up for these heinous crimes? It seems like every serial killer, I mean, they get more ass than a rock star does. I don't understand it.
It is crazy. Well, you and I talked about, I don't know if you took a look at it, but that Web Sleuths forum.
Yeah.
That thing is next level too. I mean, it's crazy, and I got exposed to it during the Abaroa case because there was so much going on with it, and I haven't been able to prove it, but I'm pretty confident that one of the screen names, I think Raven had some involvement in it or something. There was just too much real time information.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of kept the ball in the air, like you and I talked about. I think it was like a year or so after this murder, he just all of a sudden says, "Hey, I found this knife," and mails it back to the police department. And, we did some studies and they couldn't include it or exclude it. I mean, it would have been the type of knife. You guys obviously with hunting are familiar with knives and how they interact with bone. Well, this was a throwing knife, which, has a big old thick, it's super thick. It's not really made for cutting, but
piercing.
Her sternum was completely pierced and the back two ribs were totally incised. Oof. So that's not a kitchen knife. It's got to have some stability.
Now, one of the videos that I saw of you is going back to the staging of the Abaroa crime scene. You said pictures were on the wall. He said you were talking about how a stabbing is a violent act, and it usually takes the course over a couple rooms. Pictures are off the wall. There's mayhem. But in the room where in the Abaroa case, it was perfect. No pictures were knocked off the walls. I mean, it didn't fit what you normally see. So how did he go about this?
So that was huge in my opinion, is that this occurred in a small little bedroom that had been converted to an office. And the space that Janet was in was maybe like 2 feet away from the edge of a desk. Mm-hmm. And there was no blood. So again, talking about crime scenes, I've been on stabbings where they start at the front door that was maybe like a break-in or some kind of a situation, and they end at the, down the hall, around the corner, because it's not immediate. I mean, you don't stab someone and they immediately fall. I mean, again, let's go back to hunting. Right. When you shoot a deer, and you're caping them out, you see all that terminal shock that the bullet delivers, which is similar with a human being. So you don't have that incapacitation that you do with stabbings. You have to be, it's intimate. I mean, unless you've got 20-foot long arms, right? You're not, you're on top of them. So what the theory is she came into the office. And I believe that, with the evidence that he came around and stabbed her in the chest from behind. And let me reach out to the women that are listening. that have children. Think about this. You're at home, okay, and someone allegedly breaks into your house. They make their way to the second floor where you're at. They pass your child's room. They go into another room, okay? You confront them in there. First off, that just doesn't make sense anyway. We got to put common sense in there that the child is going to be the priority. And plus, Janet was a college soccer player, an in-shape person, and there was no struggle. So to me, that means it had to be a known, it couldn't have been just some random person. Because first off, again, if you go through the crime scene, what I always everyone always looks for the big macro in these cases. And the key is the mosaic, the tiny, putting all these little pieces together to make this, a complete picture. And, a would-be burglar, first off, breaking into homes at night is usually an anomaly.
Right.
Making your way to the second floor, going into an office, in passing rooms and not going through there, going into an office, and guess what was only stolen from the home?
His
laptop. A laptop
right.
and knives.
Right. Yeah, so that doesn't fit the burglary narrative. I've not ever studied this, but I'm assuming that, just trying to use some common sense, if you're a burglar, you start on the bottom floor and you start pilfering through shit, seeing what you can get, and eventually you work your way up to the top floor.
Well, if you look at Abaroa, and I think they showed it, but the first thing on the crime scene, one of the biggest things in the crime scene photos that stood out with me is her wedding set is laying right there on the counter. She'd washed the dishes and left her rings right there.
Yeah, that would be gone first thing.
Right. That'd be in somebody's pocket.
That's why in this case, and I was blessed to follow some amazing investigators with their details. You got to remember, this case also happened prior to all this audio and video. See, nowadays, I think we've conditioned, the public to think, and unfortunately for officers, if it isn't on that body cam or on a home ring camera or on some pole camera or something like that, it didn't happen. The putting the circumstantial case together and showing that the totality adds up to this is if it's not, propped up by video or audio. And see, with this case, that didn't occur even back then. Recording the suspects or witnesses' interviews, where you would interview them in an interview room and take handwritten notes. It wasn't recorded, so we didn't have all that technology, embedded into this case as well.
One of the things I found real interesting about this case was the contact lenses.
Yeah.
Nobody sleeps with their contact lens. I don't wear contacts, but I do know that from everybody in my family does. And y'all went and exhumed her body. Is that correct?
We did. It was and that's where my interaction with the Peterson case came in a little bit more detailed. Is in Peterson there was an exhumation of one of his. I don't know if they were. I think they were married.
It was
Michael Peterson.
Yeah, it was
common law.
No, it was a family friend. She allegedly fell down the staircase, and then he got their daughters.
Yes.
It happened in Germany.
Yeah, and she was exhumed as part of the Peterson case. A matter of fact, I think she was buried overseas, if I'm not mistaken.
No, she was buried in Texas.
That's right, and they went overseas to do some interviews with the people from the military base. That's right. So, but yes, in Abaroa, in order to get that exhumation, we had to go before Pennsylvania court to get a court order, because you know why? Because Raven wouldn't consent to it. Because every innocent husband is going to fight the effort to find evidence. So we went before a hearing in Pennsylvania. It was like a couple-day hearing in the courts up there, and had to present evidence to why we were going to exhume Janet. And part of that we had to show, in Peterson, there's precedent. These type of forensic examinations could be fruitful, so on and so forth.
Hey, did they try to fight it on religious differences or something?
Well, he fought. I mean, just fighting it, in my opinion. I mean, the entire and let's go back to Raven. Raven is his actual name is Samuel. Raven, and I always looked into kind of the deeper part. That's the black pigeon, is what he would also make some references to, is a ravager. That was the guy is nothing but a fraud. Not only a fraud criminally, but this guy made up stuff. So Janet, and I'll tie this in, Janet was a devout Mormon. Her family was devout Mormon, to the point of anyone that's familiar with that religion, to be married in the temple is what they want to have. And there's a lot that goes along with that. Raven perpetrated an alleged mission that he did out of the country, to the family, to get, the blessing to be married in the temple. So, his belief, he may have Mormon beliefs, but clearly there was a ton of, of lies and deceit that were attached to that. So, he may have fought it for that, but just fighting it on itself doesn't make any sense. I go back to it again. If that's my wife, why would you, put up a hurdle? Every one of the family members, offered affidavits and support, and that's, that was their child.
No, what I meant was that his excuse. I know why he was doing it. He didn't want y'all to look.
Yeah.
But was that the excuse he was using that was against their religion to do that, or just?
I don't remember the details of the actual hearing, what his biggest basis was, but he clearly contested it. Like, it didn't to me, it showed more of a guilt than anything, because why wouldn't you want there to be more, chance of apprehending the person unless you did it?
It's like O.J. Simpson. Yeah. If O.J. Simpson's wife really got murdered by somebody else, he'd still be fighting down the streets trying to find out who killed her.
Right. Well, in one of
Raven's, that's the same thing with Raven.
Yeah, exactly. That's a sign you're guilty. Or to me, it is. If your spouse gets killed and you go to court over it and they find you innocent, and then you still don't want to find out who really killed them, something's wrong.
Well, and in one of Raven's videos that he posted, because from what I gathered, he would do an interview with you, and then he would kind of recap what y'all talked about, and then he'd post it online. But he said, if I won the lottery, I would spend 2/3 of it fighting this case. And then I'd give a third, and then I'd make sure that she was remembered at whatever college they went to.
Southern Virginia. Yeah, and it was such an afterthought too, right?
Right.
I mean, he didn't even, it was like he slipped up. Yeah, so that whole part of the case, that was one of the things that, you always, as in any cold case, that you want to freshen it up or have some bridge to bring it. What is the reason that we can bring this case back? What is going to be the opportunity to put in it? What doesn't exist or what didn't exist that we can show now? And one of the things is going back to my old narcotics days. I mean, we did tons of what we would call consensual phone calls with sources, or undercover phone calls that were recorded. So basically, I would be sitting out in my driveway, because we're a 4-hour time difference, at midnight, talking to this guy, about, details of the case or how he felt. And moreover, just to see if, what the inconsistencies would be, and also to see, why haven't you reached out? Like, why haven't you made this effort to do it? Because ultimately, you've got a kid that's going to want to know.
Right.
He's got a child out there that's going to want to know. I mean, that was his mother. So my point being is when we did these phone calls, he would never take them spontaneous. It was always be pre-planned. Or when I would try to catch them spontaneous, it would never happen.
What a screwed up deal. Let's go back to the staircase. I want to ask you a question too about it.
Mm-hmm.
Big Netflix show. I watched it, and I'd watched it before, and then Andy told me, and so I said, "Oh, I've seen this before," because I'd watched it before. So I went back and just kind of watched some feelings. They find the guy guilty. He goes to prison for 8 or 10 years, and they have another appeal. What was his kid's relationship with him after this? Do you know?
I don't know. I thought some of them had sided with him and some of them didn't, but I think they had I think some of those children, like you said, that were his and some were not.
Right.
So
right.
I don't recall specifically, but what you're talking about, it's not unusual. Like I've been reached out on a couple of other cases that they do these motion for appropriate relief. Like all of a sudden, 7 years into their sentence, this person recants or comes up with this alibi or something like that, to put the case back into the courts and try to get relief from the sentence.
Guy was a squirrely fucker, I'm telling you.
Yeah,
there was no doubt in my mind he killed her.
Oh,
on Peterson?
Yes.
Yeah, and again, I looked at that case because I think, with Raven too. Raven was no dummy. He he was a smart guy. He was into technology. He just didn't cover all the bases. There's one thing in that case that I don't think it was brought up on the TV, but was really compelling for me is, and you have to kind of roll the clock back to when this case occurred from technology standpoint. But one of the things, obviously reading the case file, but going through his statement to the investigator, one of the things you look for is like, were there hedging or qualifying statements in their interviews, and where they try to really, there's a ton of like detail on this particular part of the conversation versus that, and it kind of shows up the red flag. One of the things that in Abaroa's he did is he was very detailed in his clothing that night, like when he left his soccer game, and he went and played soccer, and he came home, and he also was really smart to document his route. Like, he had to show there not being time lapse, and he goes to this convenience store to purchase a Gatorade. And to this, and I almost want to say to this day, it hadn't been probably a year that I went into that exact same convenience store, and the thing is still up there. There's this big damn monitor as you walk into the door that your big old smiley face pops up on. So there's your documentation. And he even references in a phone call. He's like, well, you know where I was at because, it's on the recording. But what was interesting about that recording is he is so detailed about what he is wearing when he leaves the soccer match. He goes down to, I'm sweaty, I didn't want to get my car, messed up and all this stuff. And he talks about being in this hoodie, their crime scene photographs of him with bloodstain evidence on it. And he talks about being in this hoodie that he put on when he got into his car, and then he goes to get this Gatorade. But the question, what happens when he pulls up, he doesn't have the hoodie on. So my question is, that's a huge inaccuracy in his statement. And he says immediately when he gets home, he notices there's a crack in the door, and he gets out of the car and proceeds into the house. So, see, to me, that was a big part, because on the hoodie itself, it had blood stains on it that were very odd in shapes and interact. Of course, he did interact. He hugged her body. He put his hand on her. He even took his bloody hand and went into the baby's room, and like you can look at the baby's clothing, like on the back where it was laying, where the handprint was. It's like he shook the child, because he immediately says when on the recording that he came home. One time he says he came home, the lights were off and there was nothing. Another time he says the lights were on and the child was crying.
Right.
Well, you don't hear the child crying until all of a sudden, and it sounds like the kid was startled, and of course the bloody print kind of corroborates that.
Now, is that also inconsistent that he would just touch the baby? Like, if your wife is laying in a pool of blood in the other room, would you grab the baby?
Well, my thing would be is let's just use it from a common sense. I mean, and again, I guess for me being in law enforcement, I'm going to make sure there's no one in the house. Right. I'm going to go check on her, and then I'm going to call 911. I'm going to also grab my child and make sure the child's safe to from this. But the big thing with Raven's case is his statement was inconsistent, and the recording from the phone conversation. So, like, you hear him talking, like the communicator actually asked him, "Hey, is your child okay?" And then he makes a statement, and all of a sudden you hear this kid just blurt out this like shriel of scream, and you're like, "Whoa, that kid!" I mean, I've had babies. I know get in the house. I know what they're like when you startle them.
Right.
And
that was one thing that I noticed in because I didn't get to hear much of the 911 call for the Abaroa case, but in the Peterson case, they play the entirety of the 911 call. Are 911 operators, are they trained to kind of probe a little bit with these people? Because that's kind of what it seemed like in the Peterson case, because I've heard it. The 911 operator kind of probes at them just a little bit, just to kind of see, like, okay, like, just are they trained to do that, or is that just one 911 operator's tactics?
I don't know their exact training, to be honest with you. I think that there's a script that they go by as far as information. And I don't recall the Peterson 911 call, but the Abaroa 911 call, I want to say it goes on for like almost 4 or 5 minutes. That's a hell of a long time to be on the phone.
Right.
So, and in that call, you can hear the scripted questions, and then there is some interaction, because I do think their training is they try to keep them on the line. And there has been, that's one of the first things I always did when we would get a case is get copies of that 911 call, because there's stuff that's said in the background or other things that could be critical to the case.
Right. I just found that interesting, and I didn't know if that was kind of their training to kind of. And that's another thing, like how much of that 911 call is admissible in court, because people are frantic and people's memories are, fuzzy in the heat of these moments. So how much of that 911 call could be admissible?
Well, it's public record. You can FOIA request a 911 call. I mean, you could go down a Freedom of Information Act and ask for it. Sometimes there could be some circumstances where they're sealed, but the media does it all the time.
Right, but what I'm getting at is
just like these body cams. I mean, that's public. They can go. They can seek it out.
Even on an open case.
I don't. To be honest, I would have to find out the legal part of it, but I'm pretty confident, because I remember seeing a lot of them where they would get this. The defense attorney, whatever we got, we had 100% discovery.
Right.
There wasn't anything that we got that we didn't turn over to them. So they're going to obviously get it. But as far as I'm pretty confident that it could vary from state to state, that's public information.
Well, like in
that you can see.
The Minneapolis shooting the death in Floyd, and the one in Atlanta. It seemed to me like the one in Atlanta, especially, if they would have released that body cam as soon as that thing comes out and hits the airwaves, it would knock down a lot of the riots and looting a lot of time, because it's a justifiable shooting. And so you're right. They released those cameras 2 or 3 or 4 days later, and it's damn sure an open case still. So I guess it is public. I got one question about the staircase. When in the house, he shows them with the blood, they're doing the blood splatter, and they take the jury to the house. Now that guy is on bond, and he's living in that house. Would you not clean up this stuff?
When can you legally clean that off?
I'm assuming once the house is released, you can do it.
Whatever you want.
Whenever you want.
Yeah, but did you know, in that documentary, it shows them going back a year later, and there's still blood splatter all over the walls and shit. And I'm thinking, well, I'd clean that crap up.
Well, that's pretty damn weird. I mean, I wouldn't, I didn't go on that. Now, we went back, and I think one of the 2020 episodes, I went back, that the house that the Abaroas lived in was a rental. Mm-hmm. So we went back to that home. What I wanted to show him is how small this room was, and how it just, again, with Aboroa, it was the totality. And one of the things that was really significant to me is the lack of disturbance in the bedroom. Right. And I just wanted to illustrate, it's a tiny damn room with all this other stuff in there, and there was no, and I'm almost confident, but I can't say 100%. But when we were looking at the room, if you don't, I'm not a painter, I'm terrible at painting, as a matter of fact, and that stuff comes through the wall if it's not cleaned up.
Really? And
I was almost certain it looked like where there was some type of a cleaning solution, wasn't used, because it looked like there was some of the blood stain evidence coming through the paint at that house as well.
So in your mind, did Raven go play the soccer and then murder, or backwards? Did he commit the crime and then go play soccer?
So it's the belief that he committed the crime and then went to the soccer game.
God, can you imagine? That's cold-blooded shit.
God.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you even further and talk about staging. So one of the things in Abaroa, like, there's this whole thing of this staging, the term that it's obviously, creating the crime scene. One of the things that happens is their marriage is, they're seeking counseling for their marriage. So they have a church member that would come over weekly, and we interview him, and they interview him there. But one of the things, and you got to remember, again, they didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. And this guy had like a Ducati. He had like all kind, way above his head. He was so upside down and everything. So one of the things that was huge to me is this person from the church that came over and did this counseling. He shows up, and as he's pulling into the driveway, he sees Raven carrying this big screen TV out and loading it into his car. And he kind of has that oh crap look on his face. when he sees the guy pulling up, for their counseling session, like, oops. And then he kind of gives him some weird story, and he gives the guy the TV. He's like, yeah, I was going to take it. It's got a broken something. But, again, another part of that mosaic where, like, again, you have no money and you're taking this TV out of your home for what? To take it to your soccer game?
Right.
And then you got to put your kid in the back seat to go. I mean, again, all these things that didn't add up.
So how long did you look at the case until you noticed the contact lenses? When did that jump out at you? Because that was ultimately the detail that broke the case.
Well, it was part of it. It was, a series of things. So I got the case and spent probably every bit of a month just going over it before reaching out to witnesses or family members or anything like that. I think maybe the department may have reached out and said, we have someone looking at the case again or something like that. There was a sergeant in our over our unit that was also had some involvement in the case and had, contact with the families. They're dealing with most of the victims' families. And it was probably a few months into it, that portion of going through what we would call an evidence review. Like, again, I didn't have the luxury of like some of the cases now where you could sit there and pop in a bunch of DVDs and, listen to the interviews, pick up on body language. Mm-hmm. I had to really rely on handwritten notes, which were phenomenal. I mean, like I said, the investigators before me, the details and those guys were still, within the department. So we would, I had them to go over to get information as well. So, probably a couple months into it, going through the actual evidence of the case, I noticed that contact container on the bathroom counter, and it was open. And then when I went through the evidence logs, it didn't show any, logging of, contacts actually being in the case. And that's when I said, this is another thing, talking with the family members and people that were around there. And plus technology back then, people didn't sleep in hard contacts. It was like miserable. Right. I mean, people just didn't do it. We're creatures of habits, but, again, it was one of those things that didn't add up, that the story was that she was going to bed when he left.
Could Raven have said that she was getting ready for bed, he left, and that the murder happened before she got her contacts out? Or did he say that she was in bed?
Oh, I would love for him to say something like that. It would be inconsistent. I mean, because she had them in her head, right? I mean, they were still there. So, the point being is that, all the witnesses, particularly her sister who grew up with her, but not only grew up with her, but was in college with her, said, no, this is what, plus, again, the technology back then, they're not the kind of contacts you would sleep in. Apparently, I don't wear contacts. But apparently they were, at that time, it was a miserable process to get these type of hard contacts out if you did sleep.
Right. But what I'm saying is could Raven have said she got murdered before she got her contacts out? I left. She was getting ready for bed. She was brushing her teeth or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, sure he could have. But, he didn't.
Yeah.
He said she was in the bed.
Yeah. Oh, so he said she was in bed. Not getting ready for bed.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, from what I recall, I don't have the actual statement, but that she was in the bed. I want to say there was even some like elaboration that she was watching some reruns of some show or something. That was, I guess, her routine.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go ahead.
These guys that do this to their spouses and shit like this, why don't they just fucking go in there and plug a fucking hairdryer and throw it in the bathtub or in there and say, oh shit, I don't. I mean, there's just so many simple ways to kill your spouse without doing something stupid like this.
Yeah. I mean, it's better the ones that Google a map of an area and you find the person inside of it. It's kind of
that's pretty damn stupid. But just take them fishing and throw them out in the ocean somewhere. Right. I'm trying. I mean, wow. I mean, I get. Well, if you're killing your wife, you don't have a clear head, anyways.
Yeah. So I want to transition now to the Peter Moses case because this is one that kind of leaves you speechless.
Give the background.
So
on
the
it.
background is Peter Moses was a cult leader, which I got to tell you what, if you're a cult leader, shout out, because you're the only one getting a piece of ass. That's what I've noticed. Like I think that's the driving factor to start any cult, is to get as much sex as you can. You look at David Koresh,
All of them.
all of them. Anyway, he's a cult leader, and so he has 3 or 4 wives, I think, living in there. He ends up murdering a 5-year-old son that was part of. It wasn't his, right? The son. Jaden?
Yeah. So basically, this was predicated on the Black Hebrew Israelite religion, where basically he looked at women as just an object.
Right.
It was like Old Testament, type of stuff where clearly object, and that's what his belief was, and he would seek these women out. He would look for like vulnerable characteristics and, kind of prop them up. And then eventually he actually would used like in a couple of occasions, like why these women were here with kids. It's like, they're women that I had kids with, and I've, felt like I owed it to them to keep them. And, they literally, what you were talking about, but I think, I don't have the file in front of me, but I'm pretty confident to say it was actually like 5 women in there that he had children with. There was 2 of them that he didn't have, 2 of them that he didn't have children with that were with him in the home, that home. But it was all these women in there, and I always say with this case, it was the most unbelievable amount of control that a person could put on someone, and he did it with like 5 women.
That's crazy.
These women weren't, and I tell people these women weren't like chained to the floor.
Right.
They left and they worked jobs. As a matter of fact, they worked really good jobs, every day, and came home and provided money and, paid their bills and filed taxes and, did all this stuff. I mean, it wasn't like, they were in some compound, that they were watched over. They came and went like people do every day. And this guy controlled them.
And so
completely.
So what they ended up saying was that the young Jaden smacked another kid on the butt or something like that, and then they took him down into the basement, and then Peter shot him in the back of the head.
Correct. So that was the murder of the first murder of Jaden was the first murder involved in this case. And the witnesses said it was predicated on, Pete believing that he was homosexual,
mm-hmm.
and basically, took him into the garage and shot him, and then instructed the women that were there to clean it up and put the body in a container, and then, just went on about their business.
That was hard for me to see as a parent.
So he killed the little 4-year-old boy because he said the 4-year-old boy's dad
was gay,
and that boy slapped another kid on the butt, so he was showing him his homosexual tendencies. So he shot and killed a 4-year-old kid.
Correct.
And the excuse is that he was bipolar and he had lost his Medicaid benefits, and that's why his mental illness made him do something like this.
Yeah, he gave that. I mean, to me, it's like. I mean, really?
I mean, get off your ass and get a job. Get your own fucking insurance.
Yeah.
Well, the whole craziness about this stuff with Jaden's murder is after Jaden's murder, again, these women came and went, on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. The second victim who you were talking to, Antoinetta, she didn't have children with Pete. She was probably one of the newer people involved in this group. But matter of fact, she left the house and went back to DC, at some point in time. And then Peter was able to lure her back, to North Carolina to rejoin him. And eventually she was killed as well.
Yeah. And that was one thing that was weird, as how the two kind of overlap. So I guess her family filed a missing person report in DC, I think it was. And then somehow it got back to Durham that this address matched up to a missing persons. Is that right?
Yeah. So what happened? There was a lot of things going on at the same time that were like all kind of like spider webbing together. So there was an active missing person case through DC and Metro DC Metro for Antoinetta because the family just hadn't heard from him, and uh, they were getting kind of ghosted by Pete, when they would reach out, and it was just not normal, for her to do it. So they became worried about her, and they filed a missing person report. And there's interagency computers and stuff like that, so this information comes flows back and forth between different jurisdictions. And then during that time, one of the women who had a child by him, just had enough contacted someone on the outside who got her like at super like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and brought her to the police department. And that's when she says, "Hey, I've been part of this cult. I'm, just left this house out here. I've got a kid. There's a bunch of kids in there, so on and so forth." And that's kind of how the whole case really became open on our end. And then the connection became because of the address, where the complaint was initiated on our side. It matched up in that computer.
And then, where did y'all end up finding the bodies of the two victims?
So they were Pete's mother was renting a home in Durham, and it was like a regular single family home, and then there was a garage and it had been remodeled or something like an apartment that I think his brother was living in. So it was on that property behind this remodeled garage apartment deal.
Were they buried, or were they just kind of tucked under garbage in the back?
No. They were buried. They were in fairly shallow type of grave. Matter of fact, they even went to the extent of there was a big privacy fence that was put up because it was really close. I mean, it was a kind of a smaller subdivision, but the homes were not like acres apart, and it was back behind a house. And that was one of the things when we got this case is, we use all the resources available, obviously, and try to find the bodies, because what happened in Pete Moses' case is that we had all the evidence from bloodstain, from witnesses' accounts to physical evidence that, we could almost charge without the bodies. It was to that point, with the prosecutor's confidence. But, and to bring it back is this statement, once it was corroborated, like in that home, we recovered one of the bullets that was, fired at Antoinetta and ended up into the wall. Her blood was in the bathroom when we ripped up the counter, the vanity, when we really ripped it up, it was over there. The casing from, when Jaden was shot was underneath a refrigerator in the garage. So there was a ton of physical and forensic evidence at the home corroborating these murders. And it was just we didn't have the bodies. In that time of the year, it was still fall and cold, and it was just what had occurred is nature. There was I think a plumber that showed up at the residence because there was a foul odor coming from the residence, and he went back to investigate it, and was digging around where he thought the pipes were, and next thing you know, he comes across a black plastic bag with a part of human remains in it.
Jeez. And what?
Yeah.
So you end up y'all had Peter in custody at this time before the bodies were found, right? And then
Correct.
So y'all had been kind of working on the wives to get them to rat on Peter, and then how did y'all end up arresting the wives? Or did y'all? Before the body was found.
So yeah, that was the part of the once Peter was arrested, we would approach these women because, again, I always said, we go back to this was the ultimate control. Here is Peter in prison, not prison, but in jail. He couldn't do anything to them. Okay. And we would approach them regularly, like, and give them opportunities to come forward, through family members, through personal contacts, through different things to say, hey, because again, we had all this evidence, this overwhelming evidence. And the other thing that was crazy is jail phone calls. They would call him, and it would be odd. Like, they would be on the phone with him. Like, each one of them would like talk to him and, tell him about how much they care for him. I mean, these women were so, consumed by this guy. They were going and giving their blood to get money to put in his little account so he could buy snacks in the jail.
Jeez.
I mean, yeah. So, you're sitting here talking about this just amazing control that they had over these women, and they would not give it up. Eventually, I think one or two of them, when they were in did their pleas, they gave an apology to the family. And did some acceptance of responsibility. But I'm pretty confident a couple of them just took their sentences and went to prison.
And then, so the walls are crumbling around this whole thing, and Peter's the first one to narc off. He's the first one to reach out for a deal. He's got these women that are ready, that have killed for him, and he's the one that breaks.
Yeah, he was looking at, I think it was we filed a death penalty in this case, and I think that was the motivating factor for him, because it was we had I can't remember the Rule 11 or whatever the actual hearing is, but the judge saw that this was fitting to be in that arena, and once that came forth, that was the motivator for him to move forward.
What a pussy
on these women.
What a pussy. I'm serious. I hope he has the biggest, baddest motherfucker for a cellie, and I hope that I hope his life's a living hell.
Is he still locked up?
Yes. I don't think he has any. I think the women's sentences were in the 30s, and I think he's like doing a double life sentence.
Good for him.
And some, yeah. And the other thing in the Peter Moses case is like on the phone conversations when they were in jail. Like the day that we were out there on Ash Street recovering these bodies, like the women just like they freaked out, like on the phone, like when they talked about the street that it was called was Ash Street. When they started talking about Ash Street, he was like, you got to get me out of here, blah blah blah. I need to post bond, and of course he was, we just went down there and served the murder warrants on him because he was already in custody. And the women, we just had to grab them up.
Is it hard to sit face to face with some of these people that have committed these just atrocious crimes?
We're human. Cops are human. So yeah, it is very hard. But the thing that separates us from that is, and I kind of say this, you have to show some kind of an empathy or dignity to expect of like, I don't want to cross over to the line.
Right.
I'm not you. My goal here is always, in my mind is getting, some type of closure for these victims and these families. Antoinetta, the girl in this situation, it was terrible. Yeah. She was a bright young woman. She lived up in D.C., had a great job up there. She very much cared about all these kids and took care of all these kids. So it was just, this one was of all of them. And again, I go back to the human part of, cops are humans. We're not robots. I mean, when you have kids and families yourself, I mean, it can take a toll, it's tough.
The thing that kind of startles me the most is, when you look at some of these cases like Raven, he's just a regular looking guy. Like, you would figure that somebody that would do something like this, or there was another Netflix series where the guy killed his wife and his two daughters. I mean, he's just a good looking guy, works out in the oil field, and like,
what's a murderer look like?
But that's what I'm saying is you would expect a guy that would murder his wife and then put his two daughters in an oil can for a month to like be this gnarled up with horns and shit. Like, you would figure that guy would just jump out at you at the crowd, but he's just this unsuspecting, good-looking guy. Raven was an athlete in college, I think, and I mean, it's mental. I don't know. It's just these people are as unsuspecting as anybody else that's walking down the road, and that's what's so.
See, the Peterson guy wasn't normal.
Yeah, but he was a successful writer. He was he was big in Durham.
Yeah, but he wasn't a normal guy. He was nothing normal about him.
He was a successful author.
He was very
successful. You would
successful.
figure a guy like him that has his shit together and is living in this mansion, that's the last guy you kind of look for to. And in your mind, how do you think Peterson committed that crime?
I mean, it was clearly a blunt force trauma. I mean, I don't buy that she fell down the steps.
Fuck no.
And received those type of wounds.
No.
I mean, it doesn't work.
Unless you dropped her from an airplane.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I can't see. I did look at the autopsy photos, and not photos, but report and stuff. I mean, it looked like somebody took a hatchet to that lady's head. I mean, it was, and that's the part that folks don't understand. I mean, human beings are capable of doing some pretty heinous stuff. And as a cop, and someone that's there, we're just the fact finders. I mean, you've got to be objective. You can't, have this personal vested interest, because then that's when you need to recuse yourself and step aside, because then that's when it all fails. You can't get to that point to where you're going to compromise, because then they win.
Right.
What a terrible thing that, you go to this, to this extent to do everything you can to this person who is obviously guilty, and then compromise yourself.
Right.
I don't get it.
Have you ever gotten a case like that where you were too heavily invested in that you needed to step aside for your own sanity and for the sake of the case?
I don't recall one, no. I don't, not off the top of my head, I don't recall one that I had to recuse from for that. I don't recall one that, no.
Is that common in your field? I mean, do you see guys that have sometimes, for certain circumstances have to step away from a case?
Yeah, I think it occurs. I mean, I can't recall off the top of my head, involving one. I know the ones like obviously if there's some family member or something of that nature, you would have to recuse yourself from it. But I don't recall being in that situation.
Is there a case, and we're going to start wrapping up here because I know we've taken up a lot of your time. Is there a case that still eats at you now that you're kind of towards the end here? Well, you are retired as a detective. So is there still?
No, I'm pretty. I mean, there's always ones that if they were unsolved that you would want to see some type of closure. But I mean, I feel like I've done, made my effort and did the best I could with the ones that I had with what was available. I mean, I'm at peace with that.
Me and Andy talked a couple of weeks ago on a show, and I can't remember what we were talking about, but we were talking about serial killers. Serial killers are hard to track because there's no personal attachment usually. Is that right?
Yeah, I never had any type of case like that, so I don't have a ton of knowledge in it. I mean, I've read that that's, some of the characteristics of them, particularly when they're moving around and there's a long time lapse and those things with their cases.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think is that a lot of them are kind of nomadic in the fact that it's kind of random. The killings are usually the same, but they kind of bounce around from place to place. And that's what you were saying about Peterson was, you had this lady in Germany who allegedly fell down a staircase. And I guess he thought, hell, I got away with it there, so I'll just whack my next wife.
Wouldn't you change it up a little bit if you were him?
you would figure.
I mean,
what are the odds of two people in your life?
Well, the best advice that I can give, I am a big believer in go with your gut.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scientifically proven in women is almost like a survival instinct that they have. Like inherently they have this ability, to kind of size someone up real quick and call bullshit, on someone, can make this assessment. There's actually a couple of books out there where, women that have gut instincts about like, a brief encounter of someone, then that have been like assaulted or sexually assaulted, they come back and they're like, hey, I bumped into that guy at, this parking lot or somewhere, so, our gut instinct is something that, we need to follow. And then particularly like, is being a cop or doing any kind of profession where you're interacting with people, you guys probably have a really good ability to call BS on because you've talked to so many people. So I think that those are really important for people to kind of go with your gut. I mean, not to the extent of like, going from 0 to 100, but kind of to be a little apprehensive and kind of stepping back from the situation.
How do you balance that as a detective between going with your gut and kind of going with some of the stuff that you might be seeing to kind of to where the evidence could be pointing you to?
Well, I'll tell you, my kid can probably tell you, it's nothing probably worse than being, having a cop as a father, as far as like questioning you, like, where have you been? Yeah. Really? Well, I pulled your cell phone data. And, so it's like, so, you kind of have to learn where to cut on and off. But no, for us, I mean, I always felt like, the best cops and the best investigators out there were guys that developed instinctive police work, which is not something you learn at the academy. It's, getting lied to a bunch and, mental pictures and notes of like, oh yeah, this happened. Or like, like when we did interdiction, when I was on the interdiction unit, I mean, there was they always used to, beat you up in court when you would use the word profile, but there was a characteristic of, how people interacted, when a police officer approached them. Like the nervousness and the deceptive stories, so those kind of things add up. But instinctive, police skills is invaluable. I mean, a street cop that's been on the street that knows his beat and knows the people in there. I mean, those are the ones that, help you solve the cases. Right. I mean, they know what's going on.
I think there wasn't there, speaking of like just this intuition, wasn't there like a dating show that a serial killer was on? And he matched with a girl, and she was like, no, something's not right.
Yeah, it was Ted Bundy was on the dating game or something. You're in the 70s.
I don't think it was Ted Bundy.
Yes, it was. Always want to argue with me, Andy, about everything. Look it up. Ted Bundy.
Well, there's an FBI agent, and I always get this book mixed up, but I think it's called like Feel the Fear or something like that. But basically what he did is he went back, and he was a criminologist, and he basically showed like where these women that were involved in like sexual assaults or other type of assaults, that they previously encountered this person and had this gut instinct of like, there's something wrong with that guy. Or, you know what I'm saying? They picked up on it, just instinctively. And I'm a big believer. I know it happened to me one time. I was going to a shopping late at night, and I remember unloading the grocery, and I had Kyle's little baby, putting him in the backseat of a car, and I just heard like the peripheral of a conversation, some people behind me, and then I heard say, no, this isn't good. It's, it just kind of, my immediate reaction was to kind of pull the door shut and kind of cover him, thinking, hey, something's going to go down here. Not that I was robbed.
Right.
It was something that really set off this kind of like
internal alarm.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think
particularly when you're carrying a gun and you put your hand on it, thinking, next thing you know, I mean, it is what it is.
And that's another thing that I think a lot of people are kind of losing, because I think in today's society, we're so afraid of offending somebody that I think a lot of people are kind of suppressing that, hey, something might not be right here, because you want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and everybody's this good character in the world, but you got to listen to that internal voice, because it could save your life. And I mean, if you're uncomfortable in a situation, you shouldn't feel obligated just because you might offend somebody to step out, or just like you said, put your hand on your gun in a parking lot and hurry up, get your groceries in the car and move along.
Yeah, and I get that. I think that, when I was a dog handler, one of the things that they taught us is, because you're interacting with these dogs is that, you always look at the tail. Mm-hmm. If it's wagging and growling, well, it's, that's part of their play. But if it's tucked up underneath them and that dog's fear and they're growling, you're getting ready to it's a rattlesnake. Something's good. I mean, honestly, again, picking up the body language, using intuitiveness, dogs in the wild. One of the schools that we went to was amazing. It was a guy that was a doctor in animal behavior, and he talked about, how dogs in the wild, like and try this, but be careful if the dog is mean. But if you stare a dog, and I'm talking just look dead stare in his eyes, and it mentally, have like, very dominating and superior thoughts, they're going to pick up on that. And you staring them and not blinking is a challenge in itself. Because in the wild, that's how they size each other up. The first one that blinks or puts their head down, well, they've conquered them. That's the first step in their submission. And then when you get one that rolls over on its back and shows their gut, they're totally submitted. So, I think humans have these, we have these instincts, and I think, particularly as a cop, being out there for so many years and interacting with people and having people run and, you can't but develop some type of actual instinct of, what's coming next.
Right. Animals, those dogs just amaze me. Some of the stuff that they're trained to do, and I mean, sniffing out drugs, and you got cadaver dogs and everything else. It's my little. I've got a hunting dog, obviously, and I'm proud of the stuff that he does. But I couldn't imagine, having a dog that can do the things that some of these police dogs do. It's amazing.
A lot of these hunting dog trainers it applies. I mean, it's all conditioning. It's a conditioned response. I mean, dogs don't have a thought process. They're not like you or me that say, sit, means to put my butt in a seat. You have to show, you could say purple and, have the dog sit, and they would sit eventually when you say purple. Because, it's not that they understand the term. They know what's coming next, from a conditioned response. But yeah, dude, I'm telling you, of anything I did on police work, I mean, I enjoyed, and I felt like, my job as a homicide investigator, it was well served. But being a dog handler was the greatest thing in the world. It was amazing. I mean, I got to work 2 dogs through my career, and had a Malinois that was just unbelievable.
What do they call those, land sharks?
Or hair missiles. I think that's what they call them in the military. Just
mean little bastards that'll eat your leg off.
Well, the good ones don't. The good ones know they know how to turn it on and off.
Yeah, yeah. There's that one video. It's just horrendous of the dog that they're trying to get the dog off of the person and it won't. And it just ripped apart this guy's calf. I don't know what they ended up doing to that dog, but they are mean little critters. The good ones are. And they know how to turn it off and on.
That's a rich man walking around with a limp right now, probably.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, they're amazing. I mean, the military's used them. I mean, but a lot of it is, a lot of the good hunting dog trainers are the people that are the experts in it. I mean, because it's been done for so long.
Yeah. So, Charles, tell us real quick before we let you go. Kyle, y'all have started a sporting clay. Is that what you were telling me before we started this?
Kind of where it kind of goes into with you guys with bird hunting. So we have a sporting clay venue that we put together. It's in a memorial to Kyle's uncle, who was a Marine that was killed in Beirut, David Cosner. So we put this venue together is a way for military and law enforcement to kind of come out, enjoy the outdoors. Shoot some clays, kind of hang out in nature, and a lot of it too, just to get the hell away from the stuff like we just talked about.
Right.
You can't be in that zone, all the time. So yeah, we put it. It's called Cosner Reserve Sporting Clays. It's in Pelham, North Carolina, right near Danville, Virginia. So we love it. I mean, it's great. We were open yesterday. We'll open up tomorrow. It'll be it's just a good time. And also we're big proponent of, hunting sports and Second Amendment and things of that nature.
So is it just for law enforcement and military?
No. I'm
everybody.
Sorry. We wanted to focus on that, but yeah, it's open to the public.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, we have a lot of, we get a lot of military and law enforcement guys because we kind of reach out to that group, our peer group, but we have a ton of folks from all walks of lives. It's a great place. I mean, and I don't know if you guys do a bunch of sporting clays, but I'll tell you, it is fun. I mean, it is a fun time.
You live in Danville?
No, sir. I live. Our facility is in Pelham, so it's about 15 miles south of Danville in North Carolina. I live about 30 miles. I live outside of Durham in a little town, about 45 minutes from the sporting clay range.
Danville was where I was at when we were on our trip last year, and I saw that kid that his dad was dying in his truck, and he pulled him out of the truck in front of me and did CPR on him in the ditch.
I don't remember that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a sad
Well, if
deal.
you guys
I always
ever come
wanted
down
to.
this way, we'd love to have you.
That's pretty country.
Yeah.
I was always wanting to know whatever happened on that deal, but I sure it wasn't good. I turned back around to help.
I don't know what you're talking about.
We was going down the interstate, and there was a guy pulled over in the ditch in front of us about probably 300 or 400 yards away, and I noticed him pulling over, and he got out of his truck, and he ran around his truck real quick as I'm getting to him. And then I look in the rearview mirror, and I seen pull a passenger out on the ground and start doing CPR. So I made the first it was an interstate, and I had to go down 2-3 miles. Well, time I come back, there was a highway patrol going the wrong way on the interstate. Had turned around and cut across there, and they were doing CPR when I drove by. It was a sad deal, and I just always wondered whatever happened there. But that was in Danville, right around Danville.
Do you guys ever do any clay target shooting or anything like that?
I don't shoot much.
We used to have a thrower out. We used to have a big tower thrower out here.
Yeah, that had 10 different deals. It's fun. We don't have one around here to do it.
Yeah,
and I'm not a very good shot.
Different too.
It's a fun deal shooting them rabbits and then batus or something else.
I need to do more sporting clays because I'm an atrocious for being a hunting guide. I'm probably the worst shot ever. But it's another thing. When you're guiding a hunt, you're not necessarily shooting all the time because it's other people's hunts. But I need to practice a little bit more, I would say. So, but Jeff, whenever Jeff first started out here, they had a big sporting clay tower, and they dabbled in a little bit.
I used to shoot every night. I used to shoot 100 rounds every afternoon, sometimes 200 rounds.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, nowadays you can't find the ammo. It's just like it's a unicorn. I don't get it.
Isn't it crazy how one election cycle has just completely changed the way we live? I
mean, shotgun ammo. It makes no sense. I mean, we're talking birdshot. Like, what's amazing to me is like anyone that would buy it in any volume. Like, I mean, if you're not shooting clays? I mean, it's not like you can use it to duck hunt. So I just don't understand it other than either one, it's an intentional, shutdown on production, or two, people are just buying stuff they don't even know what they're buying. I mean, I
think it's just all
the brand new gun owners, and they've switched over to making 9mm rounds, and they say the powder's very, very, very hard to find right now.
From what we've heard is a lot of these places like Federal and Winchester, they're focusing on pistol rounds.
Yes.
Because you can't find those, and it's just they don't have time to make shotgun rounds, is what we've heard.
Now, does it impact your hunts, I'm assuming?
Towards the end of the year this year, we had a lot of guys were having trouble getting ammo. We're sponsored by Boss Shot Shell, so we don't have no trouble getting our own ammo. But
send some our way.
And that's they're an online company. They're great. They do all direct shipping right to your house and stuff. And but it's a higher end shell, and it's a very expensive shell for shooting waterfowl with compared to
it's bismuth.
It's bismuth is what it is.
Okay.
So there's nobody going to be buying them for targets. I wouldn't think. Somebody might be. They're great. It's a great company, but they're selling as quick as soon as it comes in, it's going out the door. But what's happening is they're having to fill in the void of the people that were shooting the expert, the dry locks, and the $10 box of shotgun shells. Now had to pay $30 a box, and I'm going to tell you that next fall is going to probably be more rare than they are now.
And that's what we actually talked to our the guy that runs Boss, Brandon Surecki, and he said, if you're going on a trip this fall, get your order. He said, I'm not saying order right now because the production is good, but if you're going on a trip in October, don't wait until 5 days before your trip to order because it might not happen. So he said toward the end of the year, it's going to get even harder to find ammunition. So.
Now, do you guys do any like upland stuff? I'm not totally familiar with your operation.
We do a release pheasant hunt, and it's kind of it's for guys that want to get out and have fun with their buddies. It is not a serious sport or anything like that. Like I said, it's a release hunt. It's a lot of fun. Guys enjoy it. The guys that do it really enjoy it. But that's really all. The quail out here, they're hit or miss depending on weather. And who knows if there's a quail covey around now.
Quail hunting has been horrible in Texas the last 3 or 4 years, which that's all wild bird hunting. The pheasants are released just like they are. 90% of the places they're doing pheasant hunts are mostly preserve hunts, and that's what we do. And we have a good system worked out, and we do a lot of that.
But our bread and butter is mostly waterfowl hunting.
So let me give you guys. So obviously my son and his friends. I mean, they're avid in the woods, which I love because I think that's a good fun. Good trouble you can get into. If there is any. But so I used to live in the woods. I was deer hunt, duck hunt, and I'll never forget. I guess one of the perks of the job. One of my buddy responds to a trespasser call. And lo and behold, it's a big IBM property now that's, subdivision or apartment complex, but it was this massive swamp right on Interstate 45, probably 20 miles from Raleigh-Durham International Airport. And basically the people are like, hey, we're getting these folks that are coming in here, hunting illegally. Lo and behold, it turns into where they end up giving us written permission to go out. And because we were, at that time of the year, if we weren't deer hunting, then we were going duck hunting or squirrel hunting or rabbit hunting, blah, blah, blah. So here you go. You got 5 or 6 cops, and you park literally in like a Hilton, like a 5-star Hilton parking lot to access this property. So here we are at 5 o'clock in the morning, bags full of darn decoys and waiters, all these, guys coming out to go to these conferences and meetings and stuff with their suit and ties. And here, us guys, humping a shotgun down this hill. And literally we would have to go out there in this swamp and bust the ice. And I'll never forget, and this is we had our police flashlights, the mag lights. And I remember coming down that hill and hitting a patch of ice and knowing, that thing slid across that pond at least 40 yards, solid ice to get these decoys out. But the mallards would come into that swamp. You would literally pay top dollar on the East Coast of North Carolina. And this was 25 years ago. At this place, and I'll never forget the good old back in the day. The waiters the technology was horrible. It was like wearing a pair of plastic bags.
They haven't changed.
I remember ripping that waiter. Let me tell you, the ice cut the damn waiter, and I had to sit out there, for like an hour. But nonetheless, I remember getting our limit, putting them in the car, and driving to work, taking a shower. Next thing you know, being dealing with something at work. It was just awesome. This place.
Yeah, and I can't imagine like having to juggle, like you said, and that's the one thing that I've noticed. So I watch Live PD a lot, and I thought Live PD was really good because it showed the variety of what cops get called to do. So, like 1 minute, like you just said, 1 minute you might be responding to a trespasser call. Next minute you might be ankle deep in a double homicide. And you've got to turn on different switches at different times. So whenever you were talking about that, just made me think about, so 1 minute you're having fun, you're duck hunting, and then the next minute it's go time. And I've got to be clear headed and deal with this shit, basically.
Well, look, let's face it, and even the studies are showing it, because, after the wars that we've been in, where soldiers are coming in with PTSD and all that, it exists in law enforcement. And the bigger thing in law enforcement is guys are submerged in it for decades. They're dealing with the negative. Like one of the things that I encourage anyone, particularly someone that's going to come out and make a position on something related to a cop. And again, I'm not saying they're bad cops or the cops make bad decisions or whatever it may be. But before you do that, what I encourage you to do, go down to that local police department, sign that waiver, and say, I want to do a ride along. Yeah. And sit in that police car, but don't do it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. See what the world is actually like at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. I came into police work and I worked in a patrol beat, and I honestly, it was mind-boggling. Like it was just like you don't know that this goes on. This type of stuff, and it's people that don't have that exposure. Then come back and make these decisions with a little bit of knowledge about what's going on and stuff. And yeah, police work is basically 99% boredom, and then 1% hair on fire times 50. Really, you go through these these ups and downs, and you don't know. It's just random. Like, literally, when and I tell people, when you have to go to work to Velcro on a vest and a gun, what part of unpredictable don't you understand? Let's face it. That's what it is.
And I know we've got the George Floyd case and all that, and it's terrible what happened. But if you watch the entire video, there were cause for their radars to be up with George Floyd, and you even hear the cops say, "I'm worried about excited delirium." Now, could it have gone? Should it have gone like it did? That's I can't say
he wasn't
yes
a good guy.
No. He was not a good guy, and he was up to some shenanigans. I feel like. But you also have to put yourself in the cop situation and what they deal with on a day-to-day basis in that neighborhood. So,
there's sure. But I also am a big believer of officers. Somebody, and I think there was some effort on some of those officers to disengage or to try to break up that scenario. I don't think anyone is going to condone what occurred, and can you break down all the the stuff that occurred with it up to that point. I think with that many officers at some time there should have been reassessment. Let's move on.
It's terrible to watch, and like I said, when the cuffs are on and you've got 4 or 5 officers around, it shouldn't have taken place like it did. But like I said, he took something, and these cops are in that environment all the time, and it's just things go sideways. But instead of just this visceral reaction of, oh, we gotta throw everybody under the jail, we should take a step back and kind of look at all the pieces before.
Well, it's just like like us. We did officer-involved shootings. Our unit was assigned to that, so you have to look at it objectively, and you have to look at all. There's all 3 sides of the coin. Not you have to look at everything. And then make the assessment, and then really what happens is you're presenting it to a prosecutor who makes the ultimate determination of what direction it's going to go.
Well, Charles, we have taken up 2 hours of your time. I really, really appreciate this. Was a very, very fun interview. I appreciate you sitting down and taking out the time to talk to us, and we wish you well in this sporting clay venue, and hope that everything goes well. I know you said COVID's kind of made it a little bit more difficult, but we wish you the best, and I really do. I can't thank you enough for coming on here and talking to us.
Well, thanks for what you guys do. Getting folks out there, recreation, that's awesome.
We appreciate it, man. God bless you, and have a great week.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Take care.
Very interesting conversation.
Yeah, it was. 2 hours. That was fun.
People need to go look up the cases and listen to kind of what it was about, but it's interesting from that sideline what's going on.
But do you get what I'm talking about? Like, you're face to face with somebody right here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, you wouldn't suspect them of anything if you passed them at a Walmart or anything. And here they are. They've done.
What's a murderer look like again?
Just a human. We're all people, and people do these things. So,
but most of these highlight ones are guys that are above average intelligence,
right?
And that's why it's such a big deal, because they're trying to cover shit up.
Yeah.
But there are some sick individuals out there.
You're going on vacation?
Yep, leaving here in about an hour.
So we'll have, it'll be myself and my wife. Listen, if she's good enough for Split Read to do an article on, she's good enough for the Big Honker podcast.
What are y'all doing an article? What are y'all going to do one on?
Me and her?
Yeah.
Our sex life. Very short.
It'll
be a
very quick.
Be a very short one.
Very quick podcast.
No, I don't. Just life of a hunting guide's wife, and it'll be fun. We'll figure it out.
All right, well, let's jump off here. Thank y'all for listening. Check us out on YouTube. God bless y'all, and have a great day. I got to be in Kansas City tonight.
All right, go check out all of our great sponsors. Check out Blind Grass. Check out Athletic Brewing Company, 14 Cattle Company, Dive Bomb Industries, Boss Shot Shells, Pacific, Dirty Duck Coffee, Gundog Outdoors, Foul Bandits, Lucky Duck, Looking Glass Duck Club, William Chris Wines, 14 Cattle Company, and Stanfield Hunting Outfitters.